Seoul, a drizzling night. The deserted streets were dark and damp. The dim streetlights illuminated the drops of water falling from the eaves, creating a gentle, steady sound. But there seemed to be something dark and creepy in the air. In a small alley hidden behind an old building in Itaewon, an old, tattered cardboard box was found, lying motionless among the scattered trash bags. The stench was so strong that it hit the noses of passers-by. One of them, a middle-aged man, curiously approached, intending to clean it up. But when he bent down and opened the lid, the nightmare began. The man's terrifying scream rang out, piercing the quiet night, waking up the residents in the area. Inside the cardboard box, something so disgusting that it was hard to believe what he saw: chopped, bloody, still fresh pieces of a body, emitting an unbearable stench. The middle-aged man's eyes widened, his hands shaking as he tried to retreat, but his feet felt like they were nailed to the ground. The police quickly arrived at the scene. The headlights illuminated every corner of the small alley, casting menacing shadows on the walls. The police's raincoats hung down, the rainwater flowing in streams, but it could not wash away the horror in their hearts. The body inside the barrel had been dismembered into many parts, carefully wrapped, but it could not hide the cruelty and coldness of the killer. There were no other traces. Not a single hair, not a single piece of cloth other than the meticulously cut body parts. The killer was not only ruthless but also very careful. He seemed to know exactly what the police would be looking for, and had erased everything that could link him to the case. The police began to investigate, but what they found later was even more horrifying. In just a few weeks, similar boxes were discovered in different locations across Seoul, in an abandoned apartment complex in Gwangjin, beside a murky river in Incheon, and even under the Namdaemun Bridge, which thousands of people pass by every day. Each time it was another body part, cut up with such precision, so gruesomely perfect. The pieces of this nightmare were slowly coming together, but no one could understand the whole picture. The killer remained elusive to the police, but he was sending a clear message: he was not just an ordinary killer. He was a demon in human form, so cold and sophisticated that no one could predict his next move. Under the perfect mask of Seoul, where people still believed they lived in a safe and civilized society, a darkness was spreading, and when the last of the bodies were found, the police could only conclude one thing: they were dealing with the most dangerous killer they had ever known, one who would not hesitate to turn the city into a hellish playground. The investigation team was assembled, consisting of Seoul's best detectives, all of whom had faced gruesome cases. However, this case immediately made them feel like they were dealing with something completely different, something much darker than anything they had ever encountered. Detective Lee Hyun-joo, who was assigned to lead the investigation, felt an indescribable sense of unease as he stood before the dismembered body parts. He was a veteran who had worked in the police force for over 20 years, but this case made him feel like he was dealing with something beyond human capabilities. The cuts on the bodies were not simply brutal, but also terrifyingly precise, as if the killer not only wanted to kill, but also wanted to convey a sick message with each slash. As the investigation team began to examine the cardboard boxes and body parts, they realized that each box was meticulously packed. The packaging material was not cheap cardboard, but high-quality cardboard commonly used for transporting valuable goods. This showed that the killer not only had knowledge of how to dispose of bodies, but also had connections to a high-end packaging or shipping industry. When forensic experts closely examined the body parts, they discovered that the cuts on the body were not random. Each cut was made with a sharp and precise tool, similar to a medical scalpel. This suggested that the killer may have had knowledge of anatomy, or even a connection to the medical profession. But the most horrifying thing was that these cuts were not just for murder. They seemed to have been done for show, to show the killer's absolute control over the victim. Forensic experts also found faint traces of chemicals on the victim's skin, suggesting that the body may have been thoroughly cleaned before being dismembered. Any incriminating traces had been completely removed, further terrifying the police. The police began to seek information from medical facilities and organizations involved in the transportation of high-end goods, but every lead led to dead ends. The possible suspects all had solid alibis or no indications that they were involved in the murders. However, during the interrogation, something unusual happened. Several witnesses, when asked about people they saw near the scene, gave different descriptions of a strange man. Each described him differently, from his height, build to the clothes he wore. But there was one thing in common in the testimonies: this man always carried a large leather bag, and his eyes had a dangerous look, as if he held all the secrets of the world. The inconsistencies in these testimonies added to the mystery. The killer seemed to have the ability to change his appearance or was simply very good at deceiving others. This made the detectives even more nervous. They began to feel that they were facing an enemy who was not only brutal but also frighteningly intelligent and cunning. As the police investigated further, another cardboard box was discovered, this time deep in a dense forest on the outskirts of Seoul. However, what shocked them most was that inside the box, in addition to the body parts, there was also a small roll of film. This roll of film was wrapped tightly in oil paper, as if the killer wanted to make sure it would be found. When the roll of film was brought back to the police station and played on a screen, the images inside stunned everyone in the viewing room. The roll of film recorded the process of a man dismembering a body in a cold and cruel manner. However, the most terrifying thing was that the man in the film only appeared from behind, never revealing his face. His every movement was slow, precise, and calculated, as if he had done this hundreds of times before. The police immediately understood that the killer was more than just a regular killer. He wanted them to see what he had done, to know that he had no fear or remorse. This was a cold-blooded killer, confident and powerful, and he was playing a deadly game that he was confident he could win. The investigation shifted as the police began searching for any information related to the film, hoping to find clues that would help identify the killer. But things became even more complicated when a series of other cardboard boxes were found in the following days, each containing a body part and a short film. In each film, the killer performed his actions with a terrifying calm, as if he were performing a ritual rather than a crime. The horror of these films lay not only in the killer's actions, but in the lack of emotion in everything he did. He never rushed, never made mistakes. Everything happened as if he had planned it in advance and executed it with utmost perfection. The police understood that they were dealing with an extremely dangerous killer, one who would do anything to continue his game. But what they did not know was that this killer was not simply a cold-blooded person. He was a devil in human form, a devil who knew how to hide under the perfect cover, making everyone who came into contact with him unsuspecting. And his game was just beginning. As the videos continued to appear, each one brought the police closer to the terrible truth that they could not have foreseen. Forensic experts and investigators worked day and night, analyzing every frame, every gesture of the killer in the videos. They realized that each carton contained a body part, but strangely, each video did not completely match the body parts in the carton. It seems that the killer filmed multiple videos and selected the appropriate parts to send to the police in order to create more confusion. In a special meeting at the Seoul Police Department, Detective Lee Hyun-seok and his team reviewed all the videos. Each time the video ended, the atmosphere in the room became heavier. The detectives felt like they were being drawn into the killer's sick game, each step leading them deeper into the maze with no exit. However, in one newly discovered video, there was a small but important detail, a small piece of paper lying on the table near the killer, with an address written on it. The address led to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Seoul, where there was a long-abandoned house. The feeling of unease grew as the investigation team decided to search the place. When they arrived, the police found the house in darkness with rotting walls and a wooden door creaking in the wind. Everything in the house was covered in dust, as if it had been abandoned for years. But upon entering, a strange stench wafted up, signaling that the place was not as derelict as it appeared. Inside, they discovered a basement room, the door locked from the outside. When they broke down the door, the police were horrified to find the room had been turned into a complete crime scene. On the walls were photographs of the victims, along with morbid notes about how the killer had done his deed. An old operating table sat in the middle of the room. Next to it were neatly arranged medical instruments, as if someone had just used them. On the autopsy table, they found an old movie camera, along with undiscovered rolls of film. But the most terrifying thing was a diary lying on the table, in which the killer's murder plan was recorded in detail step by step. The lines were full of sick, describing the satisfaction he felt when killing each victim and how he toyed with the police. The diary was more than just a record of the crimes. It was a work of madness, every page filled with his sick and proud of what he had done. The killer described in detail how he chose his victims, from young, beautiful women who worked in high-class massage establishments in Seoul, to how he turned them into dismembered bodies and sent them to the police. But what shocked everyone the most were the future plans recorded in the diary. The killer had no intention of stopping. He planned his next murders, and even selected new victims. Each name was written down like a shopping list, with details about where they worked, their daily routines, and even ways to kidnap them without being detected. During the investigation, the police discovered that all the victims had one thing in common: they had all worked at high-end massage parlors that were frequented only by the rich and powerful. This raised suspicions that the killer might be one of their clients, someone with power, money, and the ability to conceal his identity. A deeper investigation into the clients of these massage parlors was conducted. The police began to identify potential suspects, including businessmen, politicians, and celebrities. But what worries them is that most of these people have powerful connections, which could make the investigation more difficult. While the police are trying to narrow down the suspects, an unexpected event occurs. Early one morning, while the investigation team is on their way to meet a new witness, they receive a report of another murder. The body of a young woman is discovered in a luxury apartment in Gangnam, with signs that the killer has changed his method. Instead of dismembering the body as before, this time the killer left the victim's body whole, but with more brutal signs. The body was tortured, and on the wall was written in blood, "You will never catch me." The police understand that they have made a serious mistake. The killer has learned that they are watching him, and he is playing a game with them, keeping them one step behind. Anger and despair rose in the detectives as they realized that not only had another life been lost, but that many more would likely be victimized if they did not find him soon. The investigation continued with increasing tension. Every lead was searched, every little detail was scrutinized, but the killer always seemed to know the police's every move, as if he had an inside source or was extremely sophisticated in monitoring their every move. One day, as Detective Lee Hyun-joo sits in his office, staring at the investigation board filled with photos of the victims, a thought suddenly crosses his mind. What if the killer is not simply a psychopath, but has a deeper reason for what he did? Perhaps he's trying to convey a message, or has some kind of revenge that the police have not yet realized. With this in mind, Hyun-joo decides to return to the places where the victims worked, this time not only to investigate but also to learn more about their personal lives. He wants to know if there is any connection between the victims other than the fact that they worked in the same job. When Hyun-joo visits a high-end massage parlor in Gangnam where the latest victim worked, he is told by an employee that one of their regular customers is a successful and very prestigious businessman. This man often comes at unexpected hours, always demands absolute privacy, and has a habit of carrying a large bag. The employee also revealed that a few weeks ago, she had overheard a conversation between this businessman and another employee. The content of the conversation was very strange, with questions that delved into the employee's private life, making her feel worried and uneasy. However, because this man was a VIP customer, no one dared to doubt or refuse his request. Hyun-joo quickly took notes, feeling nervous and excited as he realized that he might have gotten very close to the murderer. But was it really him, or just another misstep in this tense investigation? As Hyun-joo was about to leave the massage parlor, his phone rang. It was a call from the police station, informing them that another cardboard box had been found, this time right in front of one of the detectives' homes. There was no body inside, but there was a short note, written in blood: "We're playing a game, and I always win." Hyun-joo felt her blood run cold. The killer was not only challenging the police, but also directly targeting them. This nightmare was not just about innocent victims, but also about the survival of the very people who were trying to catch him. After receiving news of the new cardboard box, the entire investigation team was immediately mobilized to search for clues from the threatening letter. Detective Lee Hyun-joo understood that the killer was becoming increasingly bold, not only sending challenging messages but also showing a clear disregard for the law. The team knew that they were in a life or death race with someone who was not afraid to challenge them. The letter was short but calculated. It was written in blood, and forensic experts determined that the blood belonged to one of the recent victims. This added to the horror of the case, suggesting that the killer not only wanted to demonstrate his control, but also that he had been aware of every move the police had made. The letter was written in a neat, capitalized handwriting, with no signs of stress or haste when it was written. This suggests that the killer was calm and confident in his actions. Criminal psychologists believe that this is an extremely dangerous individual, with a high level of self-control, and possibly very intelligent. During the investigation, Hyun-joo and his team received a surprising tip from an employee at a cafe in Gangnam that one of the victims frequented. The employee recalled that a few days before she went missing, the victim had met a strange man. He was wearing a black suit, sunglasses, and had a deep voice, but his demeanor sent a chill down the spine. The employee also remembered that the man paid with a credit card with the initials TH. But since this was an area frequented by wealthy people, She didn't think it was unusual until she heard about the death of this regular customer. Hyun-joo immediately investigated the credit card transactions at the cafe that day. After hours of analysis, the investigation team identifies the card's owner as a successful tech entrepreneur who is well known among Seoul's elite. But as Hyun-joo digs deeper into the man, she discovers that everything about him is suspiciously perfect, as if there is no blemish in his past. The man, Choi Hyun-seok, is a 42-year-old businessman who lives in a luxurious penthouse in Gangnam. He is the founder and CEO of a famous tech company and has been featured in many prestigious business magazines. From the outside, Hyun-seok is the epitome of success, smart, wealthy, and powerful. He has a perfect family with a caring wife and a smart daughter. However, as Hyun-joo investigates further, she begins to notice something unusual. Hyun-seok doesn't seem to have any close friends, and those who have worked with him describe him as aloof, cold, and very cautious. He keeps his distance from others and rarely reveals his true feelings. Everything about Hyun-seok seems so perfect that it's almost unrealistic, as if he's hiding something behind this mask. As Hyun-joo investigates Hyun-seok's private life more closely, he discovers that Hyun-seok has a secret network that no one knows about. He regularly holds closed-door meetings at luxury hotels in Itaewon and Gangnam, where he rents VIP rooms with absolute confidentiality. Every time he goes to these places, Hyun-seok wears sunglasses, a hat that covers his face, and goes alone. These actions make Hyun-joo even more suspicious. The investigators began to dig into Hyun-seok's social circle, from business associates to former classmates. But no one could provide any useful information. They all said that Hyun-seok was a private person who rarely communicated with the outside world. However, some people admitted that they had heard rumors about his strange hobbies, but no one dared to confirm or speak up out of fear or respect for Hyun-seok's status. While the detectives were looking into Hyun-seok further, they received a report from a data analyst. He discovered that, in all the footage sent to the police, there was one small detail that kept appearing: an expensive wristwatch that the killer always wore on his wrist. The watch was a limited edition, produced in very small quantities and sold only to special customers. Hyun-joo quickly contacted the watch manufacturer and learned that only a handful of people in Korea owned the watch, and among them was Choi Hyun-seok. This was important evidence, but it was not enough to convict Hyun-seok without further information. With the evidence becoming clearer, Hyun-joo decided to confront Hyun-seok. He arranged a meeting at the police station, but did not reveal the real reason to avoid arousing Hyun-seok's suspicion. When Hyun-seok entered the interrogation room, the atmosphere became heavy. Hyun-seok appeared calm and cold, and his eyes showed no emotion. He looked straight into Hyun-joo's eyes, as if challenging him. The confrontation was extremely tense. Hyun started with normal questions about Hyun-seok's work and life, but gradually moved on to questions that focused on the murder cases. Hyun-seok answered every question perfectly, without revealing any flaws. But when Hyun-joo showed the watch in the footage, he saw a slight wavering in Hyun-seok's eyes, a small but enough sign for Hyun-joo to realize that he was on the right track. Hyun-joo continued to press, but Hyun-seok quickly regained his composure. He denied all charges and asked to leave the police station. Without enough concrete evidence, Hyun-joo was forced to let him go, but he knew that Hyun-seok had shown weakness for a moment, and that was enough to prove that he was hiding something. Soon after leaving the police station, Hyun-seok began to feel anxious. He understood that the police were getting closer to the truth, and if he didn't act quickly, everything could fall apart. That night, Hyun-seok returned to his penthouse, where his sense of unease grew. But what Hyun-seok doesn't know is that Hyun-joo has ordered him to be monitored 24/7. That night, when Hyun-seok leaves his house in a black suit, sunglasses, and carrying a large leather bag, a secret police surveillance team tracks his every move. Hyun-seok drives to a deserted area on the outskirts of Seoul, where an abandoned warehouse is located. When he steps inside, the surveillance team immediately alerts Hyun-joo, and he decides that it's time to act. When the police storm the warehouse, they encounter a horrifying scene. Hyun-seok is preparing to commit a new crime, with a young victim bound and gagged on the operating table. Hyun-seok is arrested on the spot. But what the police don't expect is that he remains frighteningly calm. In the interrogation room, he confesses to all the crimes in a calm voice, as if recounting a successful business plan. Hyun-seok describes every detail of how he killed his victims, from selecting them to manipulating the police and the media. Not a trace of emotion shows on his face. But what is most horrifying is that Hyun-seok shows no remorse or fear. He looks straight into Hyun-joo's eyes and tells her that he has done his job, and nothing else matters anymore. "I won," he says, his voice so cold that it silences the entire interrogation room. With Hyun-seok's confession, the case is closed, but its aftertaste remains. Everyone involved is haunted by the murderer's brutality and coldness. Hyun-ju, despite having solved the case, still feels empty and terrified. Sleepless nights, nightmares about what he witnessed, and images of the victims will forever haunt his mind. Hyun-seok was sentenced to death, but for him, the sentence seemed meaningless. He had achieved his goal to instill fear and demonstrate his absolute power. And even though he was executed, Hyun-seok was still a winner in his own eyes, a man who had plunged the entire city of Seoul into an inescapable nightmare.